Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Deputy Majority Leader, Senator Dulo, for bringing this timely statement, especially, Mr. Speaker, as the month-long registration exercise of new voters, where there is projection of around 6 million new voters for 2022 general elections. Mr. Speaker, the IEBC had told us that every week they had intended to register at least 1.5 million Kenyans. But by yesterday, they had indicated that that target has not been achieved. It is less than 1 million new voters, Mr. Speaker. And I think majorly is because of lack of identification cards, Mr. Speaker. We need, as a country, to ensure that we fast-track and issuance of IDs, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I did indicate that there were information that the printer that is being used as the issuance of the IDs had broken down for better part of last year. But no one within the ministry and the registrations of persons has indicated the country what really happened, because the slow issuance of IDs will affect. And Mr. Speaker, majority of the people who will not be able to exercise their voting rights are the young people, which they should be the key decision makers for their future and the person they hope to occupy elective positions in this country. Mr. Speaker, there was also an aspect of rapid initiative of issuance of the identity cards by the Ministry of Interior, National Coordination of Card. But the sad reality is that in among the sub-counties and constituencies in this country, Mr. Speaker, most of the areas that were perceived or imagined that they should not participate or being disfranchised were not given enough funds, or they were left out completely, Mr. Speaker, especially the ASAL areas and areas that majorly North Rift, Mr. Speaker, where the Ministry of Interior thought that it was wise to give other areas the rapid initiative of issuance of identity cards, but in other areas, Mr. Speaker, they are being left out, especially ASAL and many other areas, Mr. Speaker. So we don't want to create disenfranchisement at this level. Say that in future, we imagine that other areas have more votes than others, not because those people did not want to register, but because it was a selective and discriminatory approach by the registration of persons, by giving money and necessary kits of registration and mass and rapid initiative of issuance of the ID in this republic, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it is right that we call them out and we know them, and I hope when the committee sits and evaluates this issue, they must tell this country and the nation why other areas were left out in rapid initiative of issuance of identity cards, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another factor that you need to appreciate is that the issuance of ID is not normal, especially in the northern part of this country, Mr. Speaker. Kenyans that come from northern part go through what we call more vetting, just like when they are being issued with passports and identity cards. So you find in unlike areas where we come from, the issuance of ID is more fast and efficient. But when you come from the northern part or areas of pastoralism, Mr. Speaker, there is what we call vetting, and therefore it takes a longer time to issue that ID to those individuals, Mr. Speaker. So that one is one of the biggest hindrance, especially in the northern part and many other areas which are marginalized in terms of access to ID so that they can register. Another factor, and I think this committee should consider, is that we should consider a situation where you are using waiting cards. Mr. Speaker, when you go to apply for your identity cards, you are normally given a card called waiting card. So can the IEBC and registration of persons become innovative by allowing Kenyans who have waiting cards, as they wait for the IDs, to be able to register for this important exercise? Because the fact that you have a waiting card, Mr. Speaker, it should give you an opportunity to register as a new voter, because you are deciding the future of this country, Mr. Speaker. And curiously, Mr. Speaker, what many Kenyans are missing out, and all of us are missing out, is the fate of Huduma card number. We thought when you have Huduma, Mr. Speaker, although it has been shrouded in secrecy, is that you should be able to register even with Huduma card, Mr. Speaker. And I think going into...
What's it, Senator Mogeni? On intervention?
Yes, I just wanted to inform my learned friend, because, Mr. Speaker, these proceedings are being watched live on TV, and he's made a statement that IBC should consider allowing Kenyans with waiting cards to register as voters. But, Mr. Speaker, the law is very clear that the only document you can present is either a valid passport or a national identity card. So my learned colleague, being a good friend of mine and a lawyer, should not create the wrong impression that there is a lacuna in the law for waiting cards to be used. I think what we should be doing is to urge the government to facilitate issuance of identity cards unless we amend the law to allow those with waiting cards to register as voters. So I thought it's important that I inform my learned colleague what the position in law is as of today. Thank you.
Senator Cherargei, now you're informed.
Mr. I don't know whether it was point of order or information, because I
It
didn't
was
agree
point of
to such
information.
information. Mine is an opinion, and if my learned senior counsel would listen carefully, was innovative. If the IEBC and the registration of persons would be innovative and find a more creative way. And law is not static. We can amend the law at any given time. But I agree with him when he says government, and that is why I raised the point of rapid issuance of identity cards. And I was questioning as to why some areas were given money and human resource to do it and other areas left out. That is an outright discrimination. But I'm just saying the IEBC can see how they can do it to ensure that we can use also waiting cards. And it was an opinion that should be considered either through any other form, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, what I wanted to really say is that these issuance of IDs should be the government, and I think the IEBC and the registration of persons should have sat with the government, say that when this process of registration of new voters is being started, the government should have taken initiative by issuing these rapid issuance of the ID cards, Mr. Speaker. You know, when you go to these other areas, you find in functions where the chiefs are walking around with identity cards. And before even being issued, there's allegations that they are being paid of bribery. So we should be very careful, Mr. Speaker, that we also want to urge Kenyans that they should also go and check with the assistant county commissioners, the chief's office, and because another problem we have, Mr. Speaker, is IDs are already at the where the issuance were being done, but no one is picking. So we want to urge Kenyans really to come out in large numbers, check with the local administration, NGAO, the National Government Administration Officers, ensure that they can check up with them and ensure they pick those identity cards, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, finally, is that in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I don't know why I thought Senator Kaniri is well versed with the orders of the House, but no, but you don't correct like Senator. In a FINROL. You go on record. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, is that I agree this is a timely statement that Kenyans must come out in large numbers and register as voters. The vote that you have, and they say bad leaders are elected by good citizens who do not vote. I think it's very important that you get that identity card and the voter so that you can be able to participate in the election. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me the chance to also say something about this statement. From the start, I support this statement, and I want to say a few things that pertain to this particular statement, one of which is the discrimination going on throughout the country. Discrimination of any form should not be in Kenya. Kenya is a civilized country and should not be treating people discriminating against particular individuals. In my part of the world, or in my part of Kenya, people with Islamic beliefs are treated like second-hand citizens. They are not given their ID. As long as you say you're Muhammad or Isa or a name like that, then you are told now to prove your Kenyanness. But there are Kenyans of Islamic origin, or at least people who have Islamic names, who are wholly Kenyans. It is not true to say that only those born in Wajir, because Wajir is bordering an Islamic country, are the ones that get refused to have ID cards. In Turkana, we have a large refugee camp with a lot of Muslims, and not all those Muslims are foreign. And especially if they have stayed there for a long time, they have produced their own kids who are by law Kenyans. So that kind of discrimination should be removed so that people who have Islamic names should not be given a hard time just because they want identity cards. They too are Kenyans like the rest of us. Madam Speaker, the other thing that is connected to that is discrimination of particular groups. In this case, I mean the Turkana people. Turkana people live almost all over this Kenya. And if a Turkana is living in Baragoi or in Isiolo, Trans Nzoia, Baringo, any of these other counties, or Kilifi, they are asked to go all the way to Turkana to get their ID card. There is something called vetting, which is very ugly. Vetting a Kenyan in Kenya does not make sense. So when these people want ID cards, they are told to go to their mother county to have ID cards there. But those kids may have been born in Mogotio. Those kids may have been born in Kilifi. That is the only home they know. For that reason, they should be given ID cards. We've talked about this so many times, but nobody is listening. The chiefs in whichever places are actually breaking the law by telling those particular citizens to go back to their mother county to be given identity cards. That is not right. That is very discriminative, and that should stop. Madam Speaker, the other thing I want to say is by refusing people identity cards, many Kenyans actually do not have identity cards, and this affects elections. And this also affects populations of this country. You remember last year, we had a problem here with the formula. The formula was actually claiming that people, particular counties, especially in the northern eastern part, in northern Kenya, these people are few. They were counted as being few because they do not have identity cards. I can tell you for free that many Turkana people do not have identity cards because our people live naturally in their own homes, in the mountains, everywhere, and those who register do not get there. So you find adult people without ID cards. There is nobody that is making the effort to get these people registered. So when it comes to making big decisions, like now, how much money goes to Turkana? Now you're told, oh, there are very few. They're not few. These are probably over 3 or 4 million people. But it is just that they don't have ID cards. Even in a town like Lodwar, there are people who don't have ID cards because the process of getting ID cards is very complex and just annoying. You know, as Honorable Kilonzo said here, this thing should be automatic. When a child is born and is registered, when this child hits 18 years, ID cards should be going to this particular person. Or their parents should be notified that your child is now old enough to have an identity card. But this kind of thing does not happen. So as a result, many Kenyans go without IDs. Many Kenyans do not get to vote. Many Kenyans are not counted in important issues like the formula, how much money goes to particular counties, how many sub-counties are we going to have. It's so ugly, it's so bad that somebody there is not thinking straight. And then comes the thing about changing dates or names. As somebody said here, Turkana people have acquired strange names because the person registering actually does not know the Turkana name. Then they make a funny name like somebody said Kealo. Kealo, there's no Turkana Kealo. So, but because this person hears something different, then now this new name is given this person. And when you want to make a change, it costs hell on earth to get that change because you are told, oh, you have to bring your grandmother or you have to bring your grandfather. For God's sake, you're asking my grandfather for an identity card? There was never one. You know, I made up mine, so how could my grandfather have one if he was still alive? So this makes it very difficult to change names, to change dates, to have correct data on the identity card. And as a result, again, when it comes to important functions, you are refused because they say, you're not the same person. You're a different person. So go home and come up with somebody who knows you. So, Madam Speaker, I'm asking all Kenyans, especially Turkana people, to go and register, get an identity card and get a voting card. Register en masse so that people know that there are many of us there and we can make an impact in elections. Otherwise, when you do not register, you do not get the vote and nobody recognizes you. When you do not get an ID card, nobody even knows you are alive in Kenya. So people, get ID cards, get voter cards, and let's go for it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Pogisio Samuel.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank you for the opportunity. Also thank Senator Dulo for a timely statement. Madam Speaker, any issue touching on identification is a national issue. It should actually be the concern of the state, Madam Speaker, that when a child is born, the tracking of that child from the age of 0 to the age of 18, it should really be government business, being able to identify where they were born, so that at 18 you don't have to labor so much to get an ID. And this happens in developed countries, and I think we are developed or developing. Well, Speaker, I think with the current situation in Kenya where we have, we pride ourselves on being technologically apt and having networks, telecommunication networks, data networks, big data, we should be able, therefore, to process children when they are born so that there is a database for all children who are born. This is how we begin, and then we can then have at 18 no issue at all. When a child goes to Form 1 and they need a birth certificate, it should be available. Right now, parents have to go and pay money for birth certificates, start afresh as though the children were born on that day, because there is no basic data about that child. I think it's not very difficult, Madam Speaker, to have all children, babies, registered. It's not difficult. The problem is a lot of the babies are not born in hospitals, partly because in many areas where we come from, Madam Speaker, there are no places or facilities for the babies to be born. And even then, Madam Speaker, the traditional birth attendants in the villages are sufficient. They know what they are doing, and so the only problem is that they don't register those babies. So we need to train them so that they can register them. Coming back to IDs, Madam Speaker, and this is a very important mark. It is the mark that identifies you, the card that identifies you as a Kenyan. If you don't have it, you cannot have a passport without having this one. And so it's something that you need as a precursor to a passport. And so, Madam Speaker, I just want to ask that members have exhausted some of the things that I would have actually said about the difficulties that we go through to get IDs. I was very fortunate myself, Madam Speaker, when I was getting an ID, because that was when they were just beginning to issue modern IDs. I think I'm among the first 6 million Kenyans to get an ID. And at that time, the government was keen on issuing IDs. Sometimes I feel in areas where we come from, especially those of us who are on international boundaries, Madam Speaker, and my county is on an international boundary, you have to have a vetting committee. And so some people are reluctant to go to the vetting committee because of the difficulties of being vetted. They ask you, for example, Madam Speaker, to bring the ID of your father or your grandfather, and which they don't have. They ask you, for example, that even me, at my age, asked me for my grandmother's ID, and I never saw my grandmother. And so these are some of the things that are difficult. And even then, IDs were not able to reach there. So I'm just saying that let us be facilitative in issuing IDs, not prohibitive. Let's be facilitative. Even if you are the one in the vetting committee, that vetting committee should be facilitative. If somebody says, so-and-so can identify me, and that so-and-so is a person known among the Nyumba Kumi, whatever it is, then that person is able to identify that person and should get an ID. I think any adult who has property, who has his cows, is married, has children, and he comes to say, I want an ID, surely what kind of vetting is more than the person and his resources? The person and his family identified already. And so I do believe that it is possible for us to simplify and make it easy for Kenyans to get an ID. Of course, there will come times when the security must come in to identify certain people, because there are people who also want IDs for wrong reasons. But those you can tell. Those you can tell. Those are easy to tell. Madam Speaker, I think one thing we must fight is the idea that there are people who might even want to become citizens of this country, who desire to be citizens of this country. And there are processes for them to become citizens. There should be no shortcuts, but people should be facilitated to become citizens, because this country is very attractive. And so for those, the laws are there. Our laws are very clear about how you become a citizen. But for Kenyans who are otherwise disadvantaged, Madam Speaker, because they did not go to school, and I'm saying this because I come from a place like that, where the majority of the people did not go to school. They did not go to the clinics to have their babies. And they don't know how to write records of when those babies were born. And so what do you find in most of our passports, Madam Speaker, today? It's very interesting. If you look at most passports, they will say every one of us was born on the 1st of January, but particularly here, because, I mean, some people don't even know when they were born. It's not important. Anyway, put the date, but at least give us the IDs. Make sure that we make it easy for our people. But, Speaker, there is an interesting thing about our people, about our country, is that you need an ID for everything. You need an ID for everything. So if we need it for everything, it should be made available. Now, I want to urge the people, particularly the people from my county, particularly the people along the borders. We lined up along the Uganda border. Those are the people who don't get IDs easily because they have to be vetted. But those who have IDs, the ID is not just for you to keep in the house. The ID is required for voting. And I want them to go and register as voters. Because, having an ID by itself doesn't help. And I know our people sometimes just don't know where to keep the IDs, and so they lose them. But those who have IDs, or who know their ID number, whatever it is, should go and be registered. And alongside the registration of voters should be people who can replace IDs for people who have lost theirs. Because, Madam Speaker, you understand our people. They're pastoralists, they're nomadic. They don't have vaults, they don't have places where to keep these things, they lose them. But they know somebody must be there who can say, I know, you can replace his ID. Let's make it facilitative for our people. Let's not make it so difficult. So you'll find a lot of people who have lost IDs who are reluctant to get a voter's card. So some of us now who require people to vote will have a smaller registration of voters because of something called IDs. Because the ID is a human right. It's a right of a Kenyan. It is the identity of citizenship. Why do we make it so difficult for them to get that ID? Especially people whom we know, we can know who they are. And so, Madam Speaker, a lot of the situations is that we have young people who turn 18. Half of them cannot register as voters right now because they don't have IDs. And so I want to urge you, those who have not registered as voters, if you have an ID right now in West Pokot, on the rest of Kenya, please do yourself a favor. Madam Speaker, voting is not because of us, politicians. I think Kenyans sometimes think they're doing us a favor when we ask them to go and register as voters. They think it's for our good. No, it's not necessarily for our good. It is for their own good. Because leaders are elected by those people. Bad leaders get elected. So if they're really good and they want to elect better people, if they want to give me their vote, for example, Madam Speaker, they should go and register now for their own good, and not for my good only. It's for their own good. And so, Madam Speaker, I want to say thank you to Fatuma Dulo for realizing that these are interconnected. The issue of ID card, the issue of a voter registration is interconnected. And it's my moment to tell Kenyans, it is important for you to get your ID card. And if you must rush for replacement of that ID, somebody must make it facilitative and not make it difficult to get. Madam Speaker, I support. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank Senator Dulo for coming with this very important statement. I think we need to go beyond just making the statement for the sake of the statement. We need to think, because most of our colleagues have described the problem, and the problem is real. If you go for border counties, and especially the marginalized areas in the north, the problem is that
many people will never get ID unless they are vetted and re-vetted. There is, in essence, there is a class of citizens in this country who are considered to be likely. The presumption is that they are Kenyans unless proven otherwise. But there is a class of citizens in this country, especially if you go to Mandera, Wajir, Lamu, Tana River, Marsabit, Turkana, West Pokot, and even some parts of Kuria, where the presumption is that you are a foreigner unless proven a Kenyan. And in these counties, it becomes very difficult to get identity card. And I would understand the situation as it was in the 1960s. It would make sense, because we are a new nation, to worry about the possibility of infiltration by non-citizens in the country. But Madam Speaker, I wonder, in the year 2021, way after the advent of technology and use of data and collection of information codified in a form of data, that up to now, we still want our citizens to be verified manually by a committee that sits haphazardly without any organized structure of sitting. I don't know what's the situation in Kajiado, where you come from, because you're also bordering Tanzania. I would suppose it's the same. It's the same in Taita Taveta. I actually have a testimony that one of the students who was in a high school, when they went to get the ID, and is from my county, the student was told, no, you cannot get your ID in Kericho, where he was a high school student, where he was schooling, because you are closer to border county. Apparently, because we are so close to West Pokot, that you have to go back home to go and get your ID so that you can be vetted. So this process is actually barbaric and archaic. And the question I ask myself is, what can we really propose? I think the first thing is, by law, to make it mandatory that every child, before they go to baby class or class 1 or grade 1 now, that they get a birth certificate. And that birth certificate be recognized as the official document of registration. So that if you are going to be issuing these IDs, then these IDs become over and above, but the original document that citizens should rely on is their birth certificate, and which must be presented to every citizen, whether they were born in a hospital or born at home. Because the challenge we still have is that so many people are still giving birth at home without being able to go to any health facility. I really feel very bad, because if you go to the northeastern counties, it's even worse, because the stigma that is there and the perception everybody has, even in Nairobi and other places, is that if you come from northeastern, you can't get an ID in Nairobi if you live in Nairobi, or if your descendants came from the northern part of the country, you have to go back to your county to be vetted, even for children that barely know exactly their relationships, their relatives where they live in that part of the world. Number two, we were lied to, Madam Speaker. Sometime 2 years ago, I think we were told that we were going to have Huduma number. And the single most definition of a Huduma number that was given to citizens is that we were told the single source of truth. Now the reality is that that Huduma number has ended up being the single source of lies. Because up to now, we cannot tell exactly why we spend that amount of money to get Huduma number. Yet, we still go back to ID. We were told that it will integrate everything, including your ID, including your medical, including your driving license. But Madam Speaker, I still went to apply for my driving license a month ago. I had to do it separate from my ID. I still have my NHIF card. I still have my insurance card. So we've become a country of basically lies, because we were told that this document was going to consolidate everything we want. And as we speak at the moment, I think, Madam Chair, it will be a scandal of monumental proportion when it will be properly unveiled. The Huduma number process and the product and the resources applied is a serious scandal that we must, as a House, take the responsibility at the moment as we discuss this issue of ID, to find ways of holding the state accountable, to tell us exactly what was this Huduma number. First, I haven't even received this Huduma number. Number two, it has not cured the disease and the problem we were facing as the people of Kenya. I think that is the first. Number two, we need now to think beyond just asking a statement like Senator Fatuma Dulo has asked. Can the relevant committee or Senator Fatuma Dulo, being our deputy majority leader, can she, in a personal capacity, but also in a position in leadership, work with her committee in security to develop, Madam Chair, a bill that will make it mandatory that birth certificates are given at a local level and IDs are given at a local level. The problem we have at the moment, particularly where IDs are seen as very important tool of election for registration for elections, is that there is a skewed process of expediting the IDs. In some areas, the IDs are provided and facilitated, and people are assisted to get IDs. In some other areas, you don't get it. What that means is that it ends up disenfranchising many citizens from some parts of the country, depending on the powers that be who are in control at that point in time. Those people are not going to vote, and most of them are young people. By the way, Madam Speaker, those young people are supposed to be represented here by two young people. One of them was appointed the other day. I've never even seen him in these chambers say anything about young people. And so the issue we need to deal with is to deal legally with the requirement that certain amount of resources be given mandatorily and some level of autonomy be given to District Registration Bureau, so that that bureau is required to achieve certain level of targets. And then we as leaders, if you come from Mandera County or Elgeyo Marakwet County or Turkana, you don't have to come to Nairobi to look for people to go and register your people there. So, Madam Chair, I want to challenge Senator Fatuma Dulo. Incidentally, Senator Pokisho, Senator Fatuma Dulo, and Senator Faria, Madam Speaker, are three out of 4 in the majority side of leadership who come from the most affected counties in the Republic on the matters of ID. And I wish Senator Faria would focus more on this issue than the way she focuses on this reggae business. She would help more people in Wajir, Madam Speaker. She will be more concerned if she can take that as her most single achievement as a nominated senator. She's probably going to make a difference in Wajir County and assist the people of Wajir to be part and parcel of decision-making in the Republic.
Some intervention from Senator Faria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Is the senator in order to discuss 4 senators without any substantive motion? I thought that was against the standing orders. I thank you. And one of them is not even in the House, being discussed about the youth. So I think that is unfair. There is no substantive motion for him to come and defend himself, so he shouldn't be discussed. And myself, Senator Dulo, and also the majority leader.
By the way, thank you, Madam Chair. By the way, Senator Bokisho will never complain because he has gone through this problem. And he knows that if he has to campaign, he will campaign both in the Kachaliba part of Kenya and cross over to Uganda to campaign. And that's a fact because our citizens operate from, in fact, jokingly, I can say that for many years, Senator Bokisho was chased from this house. He told me, if I still remember right the story, because somebody concocted a story that he was not Kenyan enough since he had relatives on both sides of Kenya and Uganda. So these are real issues. It is true why Senator Fatuma brought this statement is because this problem is worse on the northern part of the country. It is a serious problem. And I believe that through their remaining short stint in the leadership of this House, Madam Speaker, they can take advantage of this opportunity.
Order, Senator Murkomen, kuna hoja ya nidhamu kutoka kwa Senator Madzayo.
Asante Bispika. Bispika, unaweza kuona ya kwamba kiongozi wa walio wengi ndani ya bunge la Senate amenyamaza. Na ndugu yangu Murkomen, seneta wa Elgeyo Marakwet, seneta mshupavu sana, amesema ya kwamba ni Mheshimiwa Pogisio mwenyewe, Seneta Pogisio, seneta wa West Pokot, aliyeweza kumweleza ya kwamba yeye si Mkenya halisi. Kwa hiyo nataka kuuliza, je, kama matamshi kama hayo yako ndani ya bunge la Senate? Namuuliza ndugu yangu Pogisio, yaliyosemwa na Seneta Murkomen ni ukweli ama si ukweli? Asante, Speaker.
Madam Chair, first let me start by saying I did not
Another
say...
intervention by Senator Pogisio, maybe umechokoza nyuki.
Madam Speaker, I just wanted to inform Senator Murkomen that, and he said it correctly, that other people are the ones who said that, not me. That I'm so Kenyan that I was among the first 6 million Kenyans to get an ID. And that there should be no doubt at all that I'm a Kenyan. Thank you.
Madam
Senator
Chair,
Murkomen.
I have never doubted the Kenyanness of Senator Pogisio. It's only that someone raised some doubts 34 years ago. And I want to tell Senator Matzayo to remind himself that 34 years ago, Senator Pogisio was in this chamber. And he was unceremoniously removed from this chamber 34 years ago. So it's not a joke when I say that he understands the problems. And the truth is that the Pokots, who are pastoralists, do not know international boundaries. They only know that they have relatives on the other side of Uganda and they have relatives on the part of Kenya. And just because of that, they are denied their right to receive documentation as the rightful people of Kenya. Madam Chair, I am perfectly in order to question the commitment of the youthful or the youth nominees in this House to the process of defending youth issues in this House. Because giving an ID, Madam Chair, is a very important youth issue. But most of them are focusing on reggae more than the business that they were brought here. But anyway, that's a matter for another day. Let me conclude by saying that we need to ensure that we translate what we have debated or here to now law. Either draft a law that makes it mandatory for registration to, in any case, Article 6 of the Constitution talks about devolution of all functions of national government, both at the national and county level. Why can't we ensure that registration of persons is devolved to the constituency level, which are districts now, or districts because there are some counties, constituencies that have more than one district. And we have these districts become the center for registration. And we give them resources at that point in time and make sure that leaders can then hold their district coordinators for registration into account. Why don't we draft this law, deal with it, push it to wherever we are able to do, to ensure that in future we do not have a problem where some parts of the country will be given IDs depending on the wishes of those who have controlled state resources at any particular time. Madam Chair, I beg to support.